Saudi Arabia has revealed plans to build a new downtown area for Riyadh with the launch of the new Murabba Development Company, which will include a new cube-like building called the new Muka'ab. Muka'ab means cube in Arabic. The plans were revealed by the Public Investment Fund last week. The new Murabba Project will be built around the concept of sustainability, featuring green areas and walking and cycling paths that will enhance the quality of life by promoting activity, healthy lifestyles, community activities, etc. And then, Richard, I'm sort of going to start just as I have been doing here with this sort of who, what, where, when, why, because it's kind of amazing. If you haven't heard of this yet, check it out online. But the development is going to be sort of very large. I mean, 2 square kilometers is just the main building, which is the Mukaab, which is the cube. And it's designed to be sort of, well, I'll quote here, an exceptional, iconic landmark featuring the latest innovative technologies. The design of the Mukaab includes first of its kind facilities and will be one of the largest built structures in the world, standing at 400 meters high, 400 meters wide, and 400 meters long. That is incredible. That is so big. The cubic shape of the Muka'ab will ensure the ultimate utilization of space and accommodate the technologies necessary to develop the icon. And then, Richard, if you see it, and we'll have some images rolling for this for our YouTube followers and watchers, but inspired by the modern Najdi architectural style. So it does have the sort of goldish Arabic design to it on the outside, but it will be very modern on the inside, and you can sort of see it. There's an interesting little spiral on the inside. I'm not going to do a great job describing it. You have to just go onto our YouTube and watch some of the roll here because it's unbelievable. And Richard, I had the unique experience of hearing about this announcement and then being able to tell a handful of Saudi friends who hadn't heard it yet over dinner and describing to it. They went in raw. They were like, hey, yeah, what's going on? I'm like, have you heard about this new gigantic cube they're going to build in downtown Riyadh? And they're like, what? No. And I'm like, well, let me tell you. So with the facts out there, and just, I want to jump to a few observations here. And then, Richard, I want you to plug in pretty quickly here. But number one, this is a huge announcement and a big price tag and an ambitious vision. This all sounds very familiar. In reality, one observation here, when I heard of this, Richard, I'm sure you were the same way. It didn't strike me as one of those big mega announcements like Neom or Trojena, where you had to just take a second and say, okay, if they build this, then wow. And you sort of had to process like, well, maybe this is a vision and what they end up with is shorter or sort of not this. But I think when I heard about this is just a personal view. I didn't think of it as, wow, this would be ambitious if they built it. I sort of thought of it as, whoa, I mean, they're going to do this. It sort of hit differently. These announcements now, these giga announcements have credibility. I think that matters a lot. They're not met with the eye rolls or the skepticism, but rather with wonder and excitement and sort of having your mind blown. So I mean, that's an earned reputation from Saudi Arabia because they're following up on all their announcements. They're doing what they're saying and they're saying what they're doing. And that's pretty clear. We're 6 years now into Vision 2030. I think that pretty much everything that they've announced, from big things to small things, they've followed up on, which is amazing. Second sort of observation, this is a good idea. Riyadh is a really quickly changing city. We've talked about that on the show. One issue with Riyadh, it's the same issue that other cities have, like Los Angeles and New York. It's sprawling, and if you want to develop, it develops out. What's cool about the new Mukaab and this new Murabba development is that it centralizes things in Riyadh. And you have other centers of Riyadh, but it's not something that's a massive sprawling development. It's a huge development in a relatively smaller footprint for what it offers. And it prioritizes things like walkability, things like walking to work. Riyadh's not a really walkable city pretty much at all. So when you're there, you're taking a car everywhere you go. And you sort of see that Riyadh has KAFD, CAFT, that's centralized. That's cool. If you're living there and you're working there, you're walking to work. There's just something about that that's really cool. And what's cool about this is same thing. It's built to be centralized, to get people to go to the middle. So you have a Riyadh with this design that's concentrating again, and that's excellent. And then third, I just want to note the word iconic is used by the PIF when they announced this. This is an iconic design, and this is an iconic building. And we still must say, if it gets built and if it gets done, but I think, there's a seriousness about what Saudi Arabia is doing. This building, the Muka'ab, is amazing. I mean, there's an amazing factor to this. This would be worth seeing with your own eyes. I mean, you would be able to see it flying into Riyadh from the airplane. It would be so big. So there's a tourism angle here. It's not just about quality of life for those living there, but I mean, if and when this thing gets built, it seems like the type of thing that could be on many people's bucket lists, saying, I've got to see the giant Mukaab in the middle of Riyadh, which is just stunning and is the height of the Empire State Building, and I think can fit what is it, Richard, 40 or 400 Empire State Buildings in it. Sorry, I don't have that number, but that's a large number of Empire State Buildings inside of it. So just, yeah, I mean, this is rad. This is super cool. So anyway, yeah, very exciting, an amazing project. Richard, you may be muted, by the way.
Sorry
No
about
problem.
that.
I was
I
like,
was
wait,
muted.
I put him to sleep over there.
No wonder the show was going so well. Uh, that's pretty cool. You get to be the source of information for locals.
I
That's
felt
neat.
like I came up with the idea myself.
So I look at this. Let me take another angle. One, when I lived in Riyadh, I lived in the Olaya district, which, if you look at it, is like the heart of Riyadh. This is when Riyadh was, maybe a million people, maybe, maybe 40 kilometers from where I lived in Olaya to the airport. Of course, the city didn't sprawl like it did. This was in the 80s when I first lived in Riyadh. And so obviously the city has sprawled enormously. And what we're looking at here for Murabba is out north, near the airport, actually. I mean, so this city center, quote unquote, would be close to 30 kilometers from where I actually lived in the city center of Riyadh, you know, 3 decades ago. Um, so I find it interesting because it's nothing there, but I also I find it interesting the Murabba part of it, because Murabba is really, there was an old Murabba. Murabba is sort of a term for square, or like as in market square, or so there was, Murabba was actually a square building that was a center of activity and still exists today, an old Murabba. And Riyadh desperately needs housing, desperately needs to upgrade its livability. So much of what it's doing is pointing towards Expo 2030. It really wants to enhance its bid there. It wants to be a top 10 international city. It wants to reach 10 million people in population. It needs to be planning these things. And so while I think the Mukaab is stunning and interesting, the rest of it is what I find, what might end up being really, have impact on livability in Riyadh. And again, the whole city is going north because that's where the room is. And so it's a fascinating project. I think it's, I like these. I love the Doria Gate project, because it's organic. It's building on something that exists. There's already a logic, both psychological and economic, to it. A new Murabba, in terms of the needs of the city, has a logic. Neom, I think, is fascinating. It's an extraordinary, as I've said before many times, and this is a big swing, and I admire it for that. I hope it succeeds, but it's a different proposition. We don't know if anybody's going to go to the the northwest of Saudi Arabia to live there. So it's hard to know. But the logic of a central Jeddah project, or a logic of a Doria Gate, or a new Murabba, uh, is compelling, or some of the things they're doing down south in the Asir and that sort of thing. You can see, because there are people here, there's jobs here, there's families here, there's connections here. So if you can give them a better livability that this might represent, it has a logic to it of its own. So whenever I see giga projects, I think at this point, and I don't think we're not saying anything, we're not putting it down. We sort of filter through the PR and say, okay, what's happening here? And what we've seen with the giga projects, regardless of the glitz, it often has, and usually has, economic, logic behind it, And even as they're going through, even if it's a lost leader, it's attracting investment, it's attracting skill sets from abroad, it's creating jobs, it's doing all the things that Vision 2030 wants to do. This is yet another project in it. And so I guess what I'm saying is, when everyone had something to say about the Mukaab, and some people criticize it, some people are really excited about it. I think in the context of a city trying to build out and accommodate and improve livability, it's a really interesting project, even without the Mukaab.
100%. I mean, you can't do this project where you used to live or in the old area
No,
of Riyadh just because you'd have to like completely, level it and start fresh.
but that's
And
what's really interesting. Sorry to interrupt. Go
no,
ahead.
no, go ahead.
That's what's really interesting. You have sort of when you look at these giga projects, and as we've mentioned before, our good friends at Knight Frank are tracking 15 giga projects in the U.S. I mean, in Saudi Arabia. Some of them are greenfield.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are, remakes of existing infrastructure. And this is one of those. It's almost a tweener. It's kind of a greenfield, but it's still organic to an existing city. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a city too. You mentioned this, but real estate is just trying to wrap my head around it because it's just, I mean, it's gone up, up, up just in the last few years. But yet it's still basically impossible to find a really good apartment that isn't like $100,000 a year to live there. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, so they're solving a real problem with this. So
office space is supposed to be something like 98%
yeah, it's insane. It's
Yeah.
it's exciting for Saudi Arabia and for Riyadh. The other thing too that I thought about, Richard, and you mentioned NEOM. Let me actually make 2 points here really quickly, and I don't want to go on too long here. I apologize to our listeners and viewers who are excited about Antonio, but
Something else.
yeah. But two things. Number one, if you're in Riyadh, and Richard, you're going just in a few weeks here, you've got to go to the line exhibit. It is unbelievable. And I sort of was like, okay, I landed there on Saturday night, and Sunday morning was one of the first things I did just to sort of get my feet wet and get my bearings. And it was, obviously I knew jet lag was going to be horrible. And I sort of had high expectations because I've seen every single piece of art and video and, rendering of the line. We had Jacob Mum, CEO of Bechtel Saudi Arabia, on the program a few weeks ago talking about how much dirt they're moving around in NEOM to build the spine. I knew it was real, but after seeing this exhibit, I just, mind blowing is the best way to describe it. The exhibit itself is mind blowing. It's a huge, sprawling exhibit that goes into detail I didn't even know about. Just unbelievable. And it's free. Just got to register online. It's so cool. But also, Richard, having this come into Riyadh by 2030, as you mentioned, which is a significant date, if it makes Riyadh, if they do build NEOM exactly as they describe it, it makes it competitive with NEOM. I mean, NEOM is going to be a really, really cool place to live. 7 million people could live there in the line and around the area, and got the marina and all this other stuff going on. I mean, that city is going to be cool. This could make Riyadh competitive with that. You wonder sort of if the line comes in like that, why you would choose Riyadh over the line. But I mean, if this area comes in and this is the place to be in Riyadh, just like CAFT seems like it could be anywhere in the world. It's cool to see all this going on, really. And to see the Public Investment Fund and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman follow through on what they're saying, at least, so far. So,
and as we talk about this, one of the interesting, the distinction between the line and Riyadh, let's say Riyadh 2030, envisioned as they would like to see it, somewhere between 8 and 10 million people, and a livable city. That's a boatload to happen in 7 years, by the way, for any of these. So we have to be realistic. Mohammed bin Salman has specifically stated he sort of sees the line as 50-50 between expats and Saudis. So, Riyadh will never be 50-50 expat Saudis. And that's sort of the thing. You may want to live in the line and think that's really cool and love it or and that sort of thing. But, if you're living in Riyadh, you can visit your grandparents and your parents and your cousins and all your friends that you've grown up with. Or same with Jeddah or Dammam, Khobar, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? There's an organic history there. There's legacy. There's ties. Whereas NEOM would be an entirely different proposition. That's a whole new thing in the desert. And it may be attractive to some and attractive to others. And actually, one of the interesting things about Faisal Durrani, who was one of our favorites, the Middle East manager and a partner for Knight Frank, the studies they've shown is there's a whole lot of interest in Neom as a residential, but as I understand it, a lot of it is about second homes.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have people with, maybe, so anyway, this is a discussion. Think about this discussion. First of all, Neom doesn't exist yet, but let's say we're looking at 2035 and you have these options, to live in Neom. There's a job in Neom. Maybe you want to raise your family there. Maybe you're a young couple and you're good, really want to be in the same city as your parents, whatever. But you're going to have options that you didn't have before.